Hello, Esoteric Nation. So, in this episode, we're going to be talking about Broadway and The Lord of the Rings. So, in New York City, one of the things that New York City is known for is its entertainment, and people come from all over the world. And for those who ever been to Times Square, it is filled with thousands of people from many different nations, visiting the city culture. Now, one of its main attractions is the shows in Broadway. As a philosopher, not as a tourist, I've been thinking a lot about the function of these shows, these systems, these forms of entertainment. Now, for most people who already live in New York City, especially if you've been living in New York City for more than 10 years, maybe some of the magic has already been faded away. And that is a big mistake, because this city is full of magic and is very vibrant. And there's new cultures and new forms of not just entertainment, but of magic, showing up all the time. And the city, although it's very competitive, the shows that do stay for a long time are enduring for a particular reason. So there is some cultural value in these mainstream areas like, let's say, Times Square or Broadway. So in Broadway, there's a whole bunch of shows, but the ones that I want to highlight are the ones that have a mythical or fairy tale quality to them. So there is Aladdin, the musical. There is Harry Potter, the musical. There is Wicked, right? And there is The Lion King, right? So these are like the main four fairy tale Broadway musicals that people love to go and see. And there's also a really interesting Broadway show called The Book of Mormon, which, I'm not Mormon. I'm not here to endorse the teachings of the Mormon Church, but it is important to know that they have a Broadway show. That says something about the needs of the culture. All right. So the purpose of these shows is, theater, right? The purpose of theater is that you go in and you are elevated to a new realm, to a new dimension, right? Which is why we like being around vibrant, charismatic people, because they elevate us. Now, most of them are not, living in your neighborhood, which is why you have to go to a venue set up full of charismatic and magical people, like a Broadway musical, right? And you have hundreds of viewers, live, right, all in the same room. Not, watching this on Netflix, but, in a real room, in a real gathering. So at least at that moment, the whether it's a couple of hundred or a couple of thousand people in a venue being enchanted by a stage show like a Broadway show, that is magical and that is real, right? That it is a real transcendent experience. Now, regardless of whatever show it is that you go and see, let's take, for example, The Lion King. So I'm going to focus on The Lion King. There is a deep moral message behind The Lion King that, Simba, the young cub, will eventually become king, right? And that the kingship, gets carried down from generation to generation. The king has his time, he serves, and then somebody else has to step up and take responsibility for the kingdom, right? Now, if we just leave that as entertainment, there's not that much takeaway from it. But if you are a philosopher or a psychologist or a theologian, you are able to notice the underlying spiritual or religious underpinning. The story, the fairy story that I want to bring into this Broadway theater framework is that of The Lord of the Rings. Now, The Lord of the Rings is not on Broadway, and it is one of the most successful fantasy novels of all time. You know, Harry Potter is on Broadway, but The Lord of the Rings is not on Broadway, right? And there are many, many reasons as to why it's not on Broadway. And one of them is that, you know, in Tolkien's mythology, which, you know, currently I am reading this fine work, which I keep showing all the time, Tolkien on Fairy Stories, which is an essay that he wrote explaining the nature and the purpose of fairy tale stories. And one of the main points that he makes sure to really get across is that fairy tale stories lose their magic once they are performed on theater, which is why he didn't approve of fairy stories being presented in a theater environment or in a visual environment, because it takes away from the source of its magic, which is one of the reasons why you read to children, right? You know, it is better to read to young children than it is to just have them watch the movie, because when a young child is watching, you know, I don't know, the Disney Channel, his imagination is not really working because everything's already presented to him in a digital screen. He doesn't have to come up with the characteristics of the characters and the personalities that are narrated in those stories. But if you read them fairy tales, right, as in the case of Lord of the Rings, and you are, you know, describing a scene where Frodo is going on his adventure, the child has to imagine what that adventure is like. And what he or she will imagine is something that is relevant to them, right? And that is the true power of these myths and fairy tales, is that our imagination plays a big, big role. And, you know, our imagination is sort of stripped away when things are presented to us, you know, where it blows away our five senses, right? Where it's a big, spectacular show, fireworks, you know, so there's nothing left for the imagination. So I think this is one of the reasons why The Lord of the Rings has not made it into a Broadway show, and it's probably not going to happen anytime soon, because the Tolkien estate is probably not going to allow that to happen, because it goes against everything that Tolkien stands for. Now, what is interesting is that The Lord of the Rings has its own event that they produce, I think, like once a year at Radio City Music Hall. And what they do is they bring an entire orchestra to accompany the scenes that they show on the large screen, right? And this is something that they do yearly, especially around the time of the Christmas season. So in Tolkien's essay on fairy stories, you know, one of the three questions that he tries to answer is, what is the function of these fairy tales? What is the purpose of them, right? Now, the way that the general public becomes first come into contact with these stories is through, let's say, Broadway, right? And then as their journey of exploration is, well, why are these stories so powerful? Why are they still around? Why are so many people interested in these stories? You know, as they start asking those questions, we eventually realize that there's an entire genre of literature dedicated to The Lord of the Rings, or Tolkien's mythology. So there is an academic field called Tolkien Studies, which studies the philosophy, the psychology, and the theology behind The Lord of the Rings. The main point here is that we as, everyday, common people, venturing out to distant lands, we're looking for a story not only to be entertained by, but to live, right? We want a myth to live by, as, Joseph Campbell is famously known for his, hero with 1,000 faces. We are looking for a myth that we can live in real life. And The Lord of the Rings is one of them, right? A fairy tale myth that we can adapt and figure out how to incorporate into our everyday life, right? And that is what I'm hoping to present in these series of presentation is how can we live a fairy tale life, right? Now, first, we have to come into contact with the stories either in book format or in film or at Radio City Music Hall, right? So that our minds are open and our hearts are open and we can go, I want to live that fairy tale, right? And then once that aspiration arises, then we can find methods on how we can actually go about in everyday life, going to the grocery store, going to coffee shops, walking down the street, having conversation with friends, family. How can we live the fairy tale life in our ordinary neighborhoods that we live in that are full of magic and enchantment? So this has been Esoteric Nation, where we have explored a little bit about the Lord of the Rings and Broadway musicals.